Hello, and welcome to Alta Live, everyone. I am so excited to welcome you today. My name is Beth Spotswood. I'm Alta's digital editor and your host here at Alta Live. I'm so happy to see many of you joining us for today's discussion with Michael Lehrer on TinyHome Villages he's designed to temporarily shelter unhoused Angelenos. The concept here at Alta Live is to take an article or subject from the magazine and expand on that in a live interview. Today, we're going to take a deeper dive into a Q&A Michael did with Alta contributor Robert Ito. It's called Every Small Step Counts. We'll pop a link in the chat to that article. And as I mentioned, it's focused on these tiny home villages that Michael has designed to temporarily shelter unhoused people in LA. These villages include dining areas, pet parks, showers, restrooms. The tiny homes include air conditioning, heating, beds, desks, and locks on doors. It's a really timely and exciting project that we're going to dive into today. A bit about Michael. His bio is extraordinary, and I really encourage you to read it. It's like the wow factor is incredible. But briefly, he is founder of Lehrer Architects LA in his native Silver Lake neighborhood of Los Angeles. He founded that in 1985. From his firm's early Skid Row and community projects to the 2020 AIA LA multi-unit residential architecture award-winning East Rancho apartments for formerly homeless teens in South LA, the recent Etna Street Bridge home, and the experimental Chandler Boulevard tiny home village for homeless residents, Michael's work has been at the vanguard of the movement in LA to give everyone a decent place to live. In 2020, the American Institute of Architects Los Angeles bestowed the gold medal, its highest honor, on Michael. He is chairman emeritus of the Harvard Graduate School of Design Alumni Council, served on the Hollywood Planning and Design Review Board for over 25 years, and has been an adjunct associate professor at USC, teaching all levels of design school from first year through master's thesis. He is a graduate of the LA Unified School District public school system, Berkeley, and Harvard. Prior to starting his own firm, he worked at Frank O. Gehry and Associates. Today, Michael will be in conversation with Alta editor-at-large and native Angeleno, Mary Melton. I must warn you, the two of you ran into each other at the Hollywood Bowl last night. They are friends. This will be a fascinating conversation. So before I let them start that, a pitch for Alta. Alta Live is, again, the digital interview series we do here at Alta Journal. If you are unfamiliar with us, we are an award-winning quarterly journal focused on California and the West. You can support us as a member for as little as $3 a month, support the work we do. This issue focuses, the cover story is on Oppenheimer comparing the atomic bomb to artificial intelligence today, but our special section is called Gimme Shelter, focused on shelter in all of its forms and the way it impacts us here on the West Coast. We also host the monthly California Book Club, which is free and very fun to join. In fact, recent Pulitzer Prize winner Wasu is our guest tomorrow night at 5 p.m. We present weekly events today. We present in-person events. We think we are very interesting and worthy of your attention. Please do check us out at altaonline.com and consider joining us as a member. Let us know where you're tuning in the chat. Let me activate the chat here. It's always fun to see where everyone is zooming in from. I, up here in Novato, California, now turn it over to my wonderful colleague and friend, Mary Melton. I will be back at the end to ask questions on behalf of the audience. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Beth, as always, such a gracious and wonderful host of Alta Live. Michael, thank you so much for being here. What a treat.
My pleasure.
I want to start with where Beth just noted that we ran into each other at the Hollywood Bowl last night, and you told me you had recently come back from a trip to Vienna. And I didn't ask you many questions about it. You just touched upon it because I thought, I want to save that for our talk tomorrow. Yeah. So tell me, why were you in Vienna?
I was in Vienna because the Global Policy Leadership Academy put together these a 1 week intense immersion in visiting Vienna to see their social housing project, their social housing as part of their culture. They've done a number of these visits. There were about 40 people, including many city leaders. And it was 7 days of looking at projects, of meeting with city leaders and housing leaders. and really learning the astonishing work and the culture that makes place for that kind of ongoing work, where this 100-year history, 100 years
Wow.
ago this year, that their social housing project began. And for the architects or anybody who's maybe studied modern architectural history, the first project of memory, one of the great housing projects of the 20th century, was Karl Marxhof in Vienna in the 1920s, which remains beautiful and enormous. And the Nazis, 6 or 7 years later, as a symbol of a non-fascist social engaged culture, tried to destroy it. But with the Holocaust as an interregnum notwithstanding, in Vienna 100 years ago, they realized that creating housing for everyone was fundamental to the health and wholesomeness of society. And so that exposure and the expansiveness of their vision about how do you create, what are the ingredients of a good society and good housing. When you see it in front of you, like, it seems so obvious, but it's neither obvious nor easy to do. And it takes a lot of endurance and vision and perseverance and the willingness to evolve and change.
What did you take away from that trip? Is it going to change at all the way you frame up what you do?
I think it's evolving what I took away from it, because at first it's like, wow, so inspiring and daunting, and how the heck do we do here what they have done for so long? What's evolving in my own thinking is, in this particular moment we are in, where every day there is commentary from, whether it's a journalistic commentary from political leaders, aspiring leaders, just in general, about housing and homelessness, houselessness as a deep fundamental flaw and deficiency in our culture, in our society. What is evolving is an understanding that if they have been doing this for 100 years and it is embedded in their culture, that doesn't mean that every Austrian is like peachy keen about it, but let's say most are. I mean, it's an embedded thing that we are in the beginning, I think, not necessarily now, but in the early stages, where there's so much ferment and so much, there's hyper focus right now on this issue, that the results seem to be scattered and seem to be long-winded, but they're happening. And, you know, the best case scenarios, we'll look back on this period in a few years and say, wow, amazing how much, how the place, how we changed and what we became. But culture change is the hardest thing to do. In fact, I would say, if you're a betting person, you'd say it's generally impossible. But I think that culture change, I think and hope, is evolving, and we're smack dab in the middle of it right now. And our conversation today, I think, is part of that.
Let's just frame up, and I want to get back to the culture piece of it and the long-term vision, but let's just frame up for someone who perhaps has not read your article or interview yet, that you have, how many of these tiny home villages has Lehrer Associates put in LA at this point?
So we have designed and built as architects, not as the builders. We've done 5 of these tiny homes villages. Preceding that, we've done a congregate shelter, which is larger rooms with cubicles in them for people. And subsequent to that, we're doing a project with 34. They're not tiny homes, but they're bigger than tiny homes. They're 1-bedroom units, prefab, and then we're also doing 2 motels that we are transforming into permanent housing. So the hotels are we're working on permanent housing, but in terms of shelters, we've done about, I would say, about 750 beds. Which translates to about 325 tiny homes, so all in all, about 1,000 units, plus or minus a bunch, in that genre of shelter and housing.
Yeah, and as we say in the headline, every small step counts. As 1,000
Absolutely.
people who have a warm place to sleep. So, what is the cost of a tiny home? I mean, I know that Maybe we can start with the land, because I find it very interesting how you have reclaimed these really unused and often very awkward pieces of city land in patches in LA, one right near where I grew up on Chandler in North Hollywood.
So I would say that, I mean, the cost is an interesting, important, and elusive issue because
Okay.
in terms of the land, is it city-owned land? Is it Caltrans-owned land?
Mhm.
Is it not in the case of our any of our tiny homes, you know, LAUSD? So the source of land is varied, and that can be assigned a value. In terms of the services provided, there are two tranches of, not really tranches, but there are two parts of the design exercise. One is the cities. So we work in close collaboration with the Bureau of Engineering of the City of Los Angeles.
Mhm.
They are collaborators and they set the scene. So by the time we come onto the scene, the site has been selected, the services necessary to make the site viable have been vetted, and then an initial design concept is out there in terms of how many units can you fit on and approximately how does it fit. And then when we come on the scene, competitively, these jobs are not handed out. We can talk
Oh,
about this if we want.
okay.
But by the time we come on the scene, so they're the design services, which are done by the city. And then there are the services that we do as conventional architects in terms of really making the projects viable, as cost effective as possible, solving all the, you know, really challenging technical problems,
Mhm.
and then, you know, in the end, making them a little beautiful if we can. That's not the hardest part of the exercise. That's like, you know, you solve all the tough stuff first, and then you use, you know, whatever stuff you got inside of you to figure out how to make the place, you know, appealing and maybe ability to capture people's imagination.
And has the price, I mean, knowing about the labor, the shortage on materials and building materials and inflation, like I would assume like prices have gone up in the last couple of years on actual construction.
I think that that's true, and I'm not trying to avoid it. The only cost that the cost that I'm aware of, which is not obviously, it is not the main cost, although you think it would be, is the tiny home itself. You know, that's in the neighborhood plus or minus a few $1,000s or $10,000 a unit. I mean,
Okay.
so cumulatively, those are not the major costs that are attendant to a project. The major costs are infrastructure, bringing in plumbing, bringing in electricity, taking out sewage and drainage, and the surprising and the costs of the political and bureaucratic cost and time cost. There is a cost to doing things fast.
Yeah.
And the cost, which is not intuitive, is if you do them fast, that means you're not going to spend 6 months to reduce the cost on something or to make something a little better. But it's also delays the project significantly. Those are all part of the equation. I mean, it's very rich, and the political costs and opportunities are, I think are one of the essential ingredients that make the tiny homes powerful.
What, when you're thinking of building a healthy tiny home village, like what is it, a balance of aesthetics and ability for people to be obviously very safe, to have social experiences, like functionality, like what does it all balance out in terms of what is a priority for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first news, as it virtually always is. I mean, there may be a moment of inspiration and insight. I mean, there often is, but the first problem is to solve real problems in the most straightforward way possible without prejudice. I mean, in other words, it's like, how do we make this work the most efficient as possible? And, you know, have some confidence that if we do that, we'll figure out how to make it good or better, or as I said, maybe a little nicer, a little beautiful. So the aesthetics are an act of confidence. But it's not us alone. I mean, we need patrons, whether it's our city collaborators or the regulatory, whoever, you know, whether it's again the Bureau of Engineering or maybe the council member. Somebody needs to be interested in making these places
Yeah. You,
special.
You need
So
a champion on the inside for them.
you need a champion, and that's probably a truism in any situation. And then I would say that the other thing is just, I think, tried and true principles of urban design and placemaking and community building. I mean, there needs to be a there.
Mhm.
You know, not just a collection of a bunch of amorphous stuff where you can't tell where you might live, or is there a place that you arrive or you might be inclined to congregate. So that's old-fashioned, just good urban design, I think, and placemaking. I mean, for architects and urban designers, hopefully, you know, hopefully that's second nature to you, but fundamental. I mean, making these places recognized as a place, as a village, as a community is really important. It's a defining difference, as
Mhm.
opposed to, we're just going to throw these folks down here and, oh, that's kind of pleasant, as opposed to, okay, well, there's the main space and that's where you arrive. That's where you might, congregate. And so to say that it's aesthetic alone is, minimizes, I mean, I
Yeah.
believe that those kind of things are really important. Another thing which is, important for any, I mean, again, at the end of the day, this architect, and I believe for any architect, is, how visual beauty and placement, how do you use your visual skills to make something which, touches and gets to other people. And I think one of the great pleasures of these projects is to solve a problem like this with all of its time constraints and cost constraints, and then have moments where, where you actually, it's a pure visual abstract design exercise.
Mhm. Mhm.
Where do what's increasingly less paint for color, because we're competing against others for these jobs, so cost matters. And, how do you use less paint, but then use it even more strategically?
Wow.
Or you might paint a wall one place, but then think about how the light reflects onto another white surface. I mean, that's just pure abstract thinking. And, that's a bottom line sort of core, magnificent. I mean, that's kind of one of the bottom lines why you do this stuff.
Yeah, that seems so granular to someone like me, but like I completely understand it when you frame it like that. Like, oh, right, like you have to actually think of that and how that can maybe make the difference in an RFP. So you alluded to that. So there is a competition for these. Like, is there a call that goes out from the city for there's a new
So
plot of land?
they're orchestrated in a few different ways. So we have been for a number of years on a pre-selected list, and the selected list itself is an ordeal it takes a half year to a year gathering all. It's if you have to list anybody you ever could conceivably work with on your team, and it's vetted by the city. And then they might put out the call, and there might be for the list of 20 plus architects. And then you compete for that. I mean, you put in a proposal with a fee, and so the first in this buildup of projects, the first project was our Etna shelter, which is a congregate housing. So we competed for that. We designed it, and then the contractor who won that job, Ford Engineering, we worked with them, and we developed a lot of mutual respect. I think they appreciated and valued our technical prowess. And I think, less obviously, I think they valued our design and aesthetic prowess. I mean, like, wow, okay, pretty straightforward to make a not so special place really special. Go
Hmm.
team. And then for the TinyHomes Villages, so the first one is design, build, bid. That's a conventional, we call delivery system for a project. Design build was for the TinyHomes, where the contractor puts a team together. So Ford was the contractor, and we technically are, well, we are on Ford's team. So they're competing against other contractors. So if another contractor comes in with a bid that's $10 less, they get the job. So that's the way it works. And I don't know. I think there are between 15 and 20 tiny home villages, all in all, somewhere in that number.
Okay.
And so others have done it. I think all of these projects we've done, from the congregate shelter, our way of thinking and designing sites, the use of color, or introducing shade and umbrellas, or introducing picnic tables in the first projects. The next project, it becomes part of the requirement for everybody to say, okay, here's some notions about color or other things to make a good place.
Right. Yeah. How you've designed houses of worship and community centers and libraries and businesses
Yeah.
and residencies. And you've had a long connection as a social cause to helping the houseless in Los Angeles find homes. How do you? But obviously, you've never experienced this yourself.
Right.
So how do you gain the perspective that can allow you to design something without that direct experience? Like how do you put yourself in your prospective residents' shoes?
Well, I mean, on one hand, that's the act of living and learning. It is not, and one of the things I valorize in terms of this is talking to people and working closely with people who have lived experience. There are things
that was my next question. Yeah.
You cannot know unless you have lived it.
Okay.
I
So you get feedback.
And
get feedback.
and both, sort of intellectually things explicitly said and just living in the emotional feedback of, oh, this is the way. So give you an example. We did the Downtown Homeless Drop-In Center in 1999. For 13 years, it was a respite for people living on the street to go and bathe and watch TV and launder their clothes and just hang out in a safe, open courtyard environment. For 13 years, we had about 3 million visits, and it no longer exists. Now, the Refresh Spot downtown is somewhat analogous to that. And I remember early on when I visited, and the vibe there was really wonderful. And if someone would talk to me and they'd find out I was the architect, the level of affection was also pretty powerful. I remember sitting in a chair, a freestanding chair, and a guy comes up to me and says, "I'm about to punch you out. That's my chair." And I can tell you what I learned about a sense of place, of ownership and agency and autonomy in that moment was seared into me. And I think I've been a board member, past president of an organization, a great organization called Homeless Healthcare Los Angeles, whose overarching mantra is sort of harm reduction, meeting people where they're at with no judgment. And those sort of things. And as any professional, as a journalist, as an architect, if you're meeting with people in the community, part of the real work of becoming an effective professional is becoming an effective listener, and to the best of your ability, shutting up judgment, listening to people where they are at, and drawing from people who are very reasonable to also the people who are not reasonable and maybe even a little scary. They're coming from somewhere, and it's important to understand.
I love how the tiny home villages are really built around this communal space as well. And like the great bungalow courts of Los Angeles, or even the dingbats that have the interior courtyards, there's that sense of there's a shared space that we can have together that's unique to Southern California, right? Because of our weather. So how are these tiny home villages popping up in other cities with less forgiving climates than ours, or how viable is it outside of this climate?
They are. I mean, I guess days like today, if they get a little bit even hotter than today, as they are in a lot of other places, I mean, these are among the most unforgiving of these days. Well, so these tiny homes, which are designed and built by Pallet Shelter out of Seattle.
Okay.
And they're masterful, actually. They have heating and air conditioning, right? That's like critical. I think I'm not sure if they are how unadulterated or adulterated they are to colder climes. And I don't know what the limit is. I mean, we've talked to people in Chicago who are very interested, the planners there. So I'm not expert on that. I do know that Pallet Shelter is ambitiously, pushing the project, around the country, if not other places as well. So I think the challenge, again, I mean, as with so many things in design, I mean, when I think about what it is to be a Los Angeles architect, I mean, climate is, and to be a native Angeleno, I mean, climate is the #1 defining attribute of where we live and who we are, I think.
Yeah.
But I just think it makes certain things easier, but that might be more difficult, but not impossible in other places. I think, for instance, one of the challenges of the tiny homes is that you have let's say it's 200 feet, maybe longer, that it you could be that far from a bathroom. And so if you have to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, if the climate be okay, I mean, it's not the same as having a bathroom next to your bedroom, but it's doable. In a tougher climate, those distances, I mean, at some point they may be untenable. They may need to be smaller, whatever. I think that's one of the challenges of this archetype, or this prototype.
Yeah. The price tag on permanent supportive housing always makes my jaw drop when I see it reported in the LA Times. I think Steve Lopez in a recent column had said something like it was like $600,000 per unit or something. That's just seems prohibitively expensive. So of course my mind goes to how could you see the possibility of adapting this tiny home village model to be a more permanent type of supportive housing?
So it gets to one of the heart of what makes the tiny home so powerful. And again, and I appreciate it in the introduction, it was made very clear. This is shelter. If you're in a shelter, you are still a houseless person. You are not a housed person if you're in a shelter.
Yeah.
So the need here and the understanding is that we need more of these. These are not permanent solutions, but they are solutions of the process of becoming a housed person. The tiny homes are decidedly, they're this sweet spot between permanent and impermanent. That's valuable in terms of their cost, in terms of the explicit or implicit slack that regulatory agencies may give them up to a point, as opposed to if it's permanent, it's a different order of scrutiny. Still, life safety remains a critical issue, but it's a different order of scrutiny. And we've seen that even between more permanent and less permanent shelters we're doing. And so, and politically, I think it is also really important. I mean, when you're telling, it seems that to the best of my observing, once these places are built, the neighborhoods are cool. They're good, benign, quiet neighbors, and not maybe visible, maybe not that visible, but in prospectively, most neighborhoods go nuts with the idea that there will be a homeless shelter in their neighborhood.
Yeah.
What the tiny homes as an idea is, okay, maybe they'll be here for 2 or 3 years. And by the way, maybe they'll be there longer, but they could be longer. But the idea that, easy come, easy go, I think politically makes it much more palatable. And then, once they're there, if everything's good and unfortunately, I don't see, I think a good and healthy society probably always has places like this because there are always people in need. There are always people at the bottom, and there are always people who need housing, hopefully in a less massive way than we do now.
Michael, when I first met you, which I think is around 15, maybe years ago at this point, so you said something to me when we were talking. There was an election coming up for a big proposition that was like the proposition that may be funding many of your tiny homes, was like a long-term big investment. And you said something that has always stuck with me, which was the things, and I'm going to butcher this paraphrasing, but maybe it's something you say often and you can share it with folks, but something along the lines of the investments that we make now that we may never see the dividends of, are just so core to being human, and people can just be short-sighted about that.
Well, I think, part of being human is also being short-sighted. I mean, it's like I'm human, therefore I'm really focused on the time I'm on the planet. And maybe I'm okay if I have children or grandchildren, I might hopefully I'm focused on them as opposed to something which is more of an intellectual construct, like my great grandchildren. I think good and fine societies, these become increasingly embedded values. The future is just part of being part of a society, and I think that. In general, the scale of solutions that is helpful to secure the future, to make a future-proof society, in the moment seem like, well, that's great, but we have a more urgent problem. Let the other, maybe next year someone will do that. And the good societies say, wow, that's a big pill to swallow. And if it's big enough, in the moment it's proposed, it will always seem like a lot of money. I mean, virtually always, like the house you bought that now seems to be a great investment. And at the time you bought it was like, what a big stretch. Or the house you didn't buy that you regret not buying because, wow, it's worth so much now. That's the same as it is in society. And I think it is the hallmark of a good and healthy and fine society, which I actually think Los Angeles is. And I think it's really underplayed as part of our culture, that we consistently invest in our future in really big ways. The problem is once they're built and stuff, no one talks about them and no one realizes what a good and fine society we are.
Yeah, and what came before to enable us to do that.
That's right.
Before we bring Beth on with some questions from the audience,
Yeah.
what's something I feel this way. I hear this from people all the time. Obviously, voting for those measures, those propositions, which can help fund this much needed transit and housing is one of them. And just voting, right, getting out to vote. But what are some ways that we can today work towards even a borderline tolerable outcome with the housing crisis in LA if we're not a talented architect and going out for RFPs? Like when people ask you this question, how do you encourage them to engage with this?
Well, I think beyond the maybe obvious, relatively low-hanging fruit of being engaged and volunteering in the community and in organizations that make a difference, I think it's developing the optimism, hope, hang in there, tenacity muscle as a citizen. It's like this is long term, if not, I mean, basically this is a forever proposition. If you want to be a healthy society, it's like, oh, I want to lose weight, so I'm going to eat less, and once I get to the goal, I can eat more again. No, once you get to the goal, oh, I have to do that if I want to stay here for the rest of my life.
Right.
I think exercising citizenship and a degree of confidence and hope, which is really hard, and it's really hard to crap on the things that are really easy to crap on the things that aren't working. And by the way, even if we get 90% of the people off of the street tomorrow, those 10% will be there, and we will say, what the hell are those people doing there? We haven't done anything yet. So imagine that feeling that it's fully solved. It may, I mean, you don't want to focus on it. It may never be fully solved, or it may be, but that's not actually the important thing. Are we committed to solving it? And are we committed to supporting and giving confidence and creating a society and a culture that embraces becoming our best self? And that's hard work, and it has to be fundamental to our citizenship, because it's so easy just to say, oh, nothing's happening. Who are these bozo? How corrupt, how incompetent. And by the way, corruption and incompetence, I mean, what else is new? That's also part of being human in society. Fight that, but keep your eyes on and hang in there. And also, I do think, and particularly with such a magnificent journal like Alta, I mean, good news matters. I mean, being critical and having an extremely critical eye. But man, if you're not paying attention, well, and I appreciate, I mean, I guess this is a good news story. I think that's really important. We have to know those things, because if good things happen and no one talks about them, for the larger culture, it's as if they didn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely agree. All right, I'm going to invite Beth to come on, who's got some, I think, a few questions.
I do. My first question, Michael, are you available to be my life coach?
Right? I'm telling you.
So inspired.
I know, he's the best.
Oh, that's so
I'm
nice.
just like, oh my God. And it applies to so many different things. And I really just need to be more hopeful and exercise my, anyway, I'm like,
oh, thank you.
Thank you for that. That was very inspiring. And that I don't know if you were reading from a prompter or it was just really fabulous. All right, I've got some questions on behalf of our audience. Helmi asks, in hindsight, what might you do differently in creating a tiny home community?
Whoa. Uh, I'm not, well, so, I mean, we do these things, right? And they're built and we back of our own volition, we visit them periodically. I mean, whether it's to show them to people or just to see what's going on. I think fortifying the feedback, not fortifying, uh, making it part of the process, that ongoing visit and feedback. I mean, not completely dependent on one's own interest. I think, I think the learning, it's more than the learning curve. I think the teaching and learning process, which is the hallmark of any healthy organization or bureaucracy or anything, is really important. I think we've been through a moment. I hope it will be sustained, but I think the last 3 years has been that kind of moment in the city where, because the hue and cry was so large, I mean, tiny homes were an experiment. I mean, no one knew how that would play or work in Los Angeles, and it's a leadership thing. How do you make it safe both to experiment, understanding that things may go wrong sometimes, but if you don't take any risk, you ain't going to cover new territory.
Right.
So I think, yeah, otherwise, yeah, that's all I can say, Helmy. I'm not sure.
Diane asks, how long will people live in these homes? Is there a waiting list? What's the parameters of
I
staying?
think the first parameter of desire is that the folks who live in these villages are within 2 or 3 mile radius. I mean, and I think that's true this, and also of more permanent housing for the formerly unhoused. The ideal is that, we have a problem in this larger community that we hope that this contributes to. Uh, these are shelters, and they are temporary shelters. I think going into it, the idea was 3 months. I don't know too many people who leave after 3 months. The first big idea is transitional, and transition is not trivial. If you've been living on the street for a while, how do you get used to, whether it's maybe you go to shop in the market, or to write a resume, or interact in ways that you haven't had to interact for a while. So I think people have been, I'm imagining that there are people who have been there over a year, or maybe some since the beginning. So it's contingent on two things. One is there housing for you to go into?
Mhm.
I mean, that's probably the most significant variable. And the other is, is there attrition? I mean, do you leave? I mean, and there are compelling reasons to leave. And I actually think, for me, this is like one of the most unintuitive, really important ideas. And if you ask about knowing people, I mean, human beings are human beings. So if you're in there, and the good news is you're safe, you have a lock on your door, you have heating and cooling, and you have storage for some of your goods, but in your tent on the street, you had all of your goods, and you had your community of friends and people who have shared your lived experience. So you're relatively unsafe, and it's precarious, but you also have ownership, you have agency, right? And that's really important. Another thing, which, because of my work at homeless healthcare, is drug use. I mean, if you're a junkie, and by the way, the most of these tiny homes villages have lockers, I should say, outside the gate. So if you have drugs, the idea is you put them in your locker outside the gate, and you don't bring them into your unit.
Mm.
There's probably a modicum of flexibility. If no one, if it doesn't bother anybody, maybe you can use them in your unit or not. But again, the unintuitive thing is, if you are a junkie, and even though you're happy to be safe and secure, if you need your fix, you're going to say, well, this is great, but I need my fix. And that's, from a harm reduction point of view, that's also a really important issue, not intuitive, but fundamental.
Mm.
Are services provided, whether they be things like resume writing or recovery services, either harm reduction or,
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
really excellent, and it's a fundamental point, which is so there are supportive care providers who run these these facilities. And by the way, as I mentioned, you know, we designed this with the city and the colleagues in my office, my former partner, Aaron Kaderbegovich, one of the leaders of my practice, Eric Alden, has been putting these things together from the get-go. The support, so many of our tiny homes villages are run by a supportive care. Well, there are two. One is Hope of the Valley, and they may have changed the name to Hope of the Mission. I'm not sure. They're a faith-based organization, but harm reduction driven, and they run a lot of these things. So you have counselors and supportive care caseworkers there 7 days a week, maybe 24/7. I'm not sure. 3 meals a day are brought in.
No.
So the meals are brought in and served on the campus. You can eat them in your room or in the outdoor eating area. Last time we went to Alexandria Village, that area really, they were providing programming, entertaining and intellectually engaging programming for the clients living there. And there was a sense of community evolving, which was extremely beautiful to see. But Hope of the Valley, so those are provided and fundamental. And in most of these places, I believe, and I know at the Restore Space, which homeless healthcare actually operates, every time a shower is used or a bathroom used, it's cleaned immediately afterwards.
Wow.
So hygiene is hyper important, and the supportive care provision is fundamental. Hope of the Valley is really a gold standard in this regard. We've been working based in Northern California with Urban Alchemy, runs 2 of our sites, and they're critical, and those, by the way, are among the costs. Housing and taking care of human beings is not under any circumstance a cheap exercise.
Right. We've gotten a couple of questions. We'll do 2 more questions and then wrap it up. The first is, are other cities utilizing your work in LA or using your work? Do you know if other cities are using your work as an example or model for what to do in places like San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, Vancouver?
I know we've been contacted by people from several cities. We had a wonderful chat with a great design planning civic leader who's now the head of planning in the city of Chicago, Maurice Cox, architect, former mayor of Charlottesville. I believe that's right. He had seen our work published. One of the things that's interesting and I appreciate, and it's not trivial, is that getting work like this into the culture through publications like Alta, it's important because, first of all, the design work is to capture, is to solve the problem, but capturing the imagination of the culture is not unimportant. You destigmatize the places and you destigmatize the population. So we've been contacted periodically. We haven't yet been involved in other places. There are those possibilities and some conversations that are ongoing, but none that have been materialized. But they've been published all over the world. So they become an idea of how you can do this and make places that, as I say, somehow are appealing, where the role of beauty, one of our tenets in our practice is that beauty is the rudiment of human dignity, and hopefully this sort of supports the cause.
Last question for you, sir. This has been so fascinating. You have devoted so much of your career to kind of working with underserved populations. Why?
Well, I'm a human being, and community is everything, starting with the community of one, and then family, and then out for there. That's all we all got, frankly. And making stuff is my pleasure. And it's frankly, I've considered making is a primal pleasure. And if you're lucky enough to actually realize that, that's the beginning, at least, for me, I think for many people, of a blessed existence. making stuff, making architecture is just among the reasons I live. And so I guess one of the nice things about architecture is that it's for people. And if you make stuff that elevates the experience of being for another, how much better can it be? And to just to put a, the notion that I guess I feel fortunate and I feel I've succeeded. If you make a place that someone can be in, regardless of what the function is, you're in a place, you take a deep breath and you say, it's good to be alive, then I've done my work. And that's, I mean, I do this stuff. I mean, life is hard for everybody. So if you're gonna suffer and do hard stuff, you're very fortunate if you can do it for stuff you're passionate about and makes you happy. I mean, bottom line, it makes me happy to be in community, to feel that I've made a difference. Oh, that's just, I mean, that's like happy stuff.
Creating communities. I mean, yeah, you're taking it up a whole. You're not just in the community, you're creating them.
I am sure I speak for almost everyone, presumably everyone, when I say that I am so inspired by your passion and enthusiasm and your work. And thank you, Michael Lehrer, for so much for joining us. And thank you, the wonderful Mary Melton, our Alta's editor at large, for taking this on. I knew you guys were buddies, so she was an easy get for this one. But folks, before you go, please, yes, William, this has been recorded. It will be emailed to you later today, as well as posted to altaonline.com later this afternoon. We'll send you links to Robert Ito's Q&A with Michael, links to his work, invitations to upcoming events, including WASU tomorrow evening at the California Book Club. Next week, we welcome illustrator James Ransom. He's a children's book illustrator, award-winning, wonderful. Also, 2 of his books are currently banned in public schools in Florida. We're going to talk about that with him next week. That is July 26th, a week from today. So again, Michael Lehrer and Mary Melton, thank you both so much. And of course, thank you to everyone in the crowd today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Thanks so much, Michael. Bye.
Take care. Bye.